Hello, and welcome to SPAN 2017. I'm Amber Bravo. I'm a creative lead at Google Design. Google Design is a cooperative team of designers, writers, and producers who work at Google. Our focus is to support and promote designers' work, both at Google and beyond. We do this in a number of ways. So we publish content on design.google, stories like what it means to develop brand systems in VR, or how we might approach voice user interface design. We also work closely with the material design team, who create design guidelines, tools, and resources. The material design guidelines are a set of best-in-class principles for designing clear and beautiful UI, exploring everything from color, motion, and typography. Our material components are a set of modular and customizable UI components for web, Android, and iOS. But we think of our work on material as more than just a system. It's also about creating and seeking a deeper understanding of the workflow between design and engineering, and seeing what tools we can provide to foster a healthier dialogue. Of course, a design system is only as good as the community it serves. So for the last 3 years, we've given out the Material Design Awards to showcase what we believe to be best-in-class examples of material design out in the wild. This year's winners, Blinkist, Eventbrite Organizer, NPR One, and Momondo, were just announced yesterday on design.google and are joining us here in Pittsburgh. So please give them a round of applause. And do go check out their excellent work. They're really impressive. We were so inspired by the great work that these teams and so many others are doing to bring material design to life. This is just one way we connect meaningfully with the community. Another large part of our agenda at Google Design is to support and promote our peers through sponsorship efforts. So with professional design networks like AIGA and AJI, and editorial platforms like It's Nice That and the Design of Business podcast, among many others. And of course, through our on-the-ground outreach efforts like SPAN. SPAN is our annual conference exploring creative connections in innovation and technology. As a word and a concept, SPAN, of course, suggests the space between your big and little finger, your thumb and your little finger. It's a maker's measure, and to us, this really focuses our attention on the makers in the design and technology community. It also suggests spanning distances and bridging connections between practitioners from diverse areas of focus and even geographical locations. This is our 4th year hosting SPAN. Last year we were in Tokyo and LA, and this year we'll be hosting events in Pittsburgh, obviously, Newcastle, UK, and Mexico City. So the idea is that we reach different speakers, we have different attendees, but the mission is the same, to really connect the design community and connect cultures. We're thrilled to be here in Pittsburgh. We were consistently impressed with the level of talent and innovation coming out of this city. Work that is truly innovative on a global scale, and we're so pleased to present the lineup for tonight. We'll have 2 talks and 2 panels scheduled. We'll also have beer breaks, very important, snacks scheduled between sessions, as well as more food after the event. Tomorrow we have a full agenda, starting bright and early. As always, you can find out all of this on our website, which is g.co/span17. We will also have printed schedules available at registration. Ever important Wi-Fi connectivity. You can find your Wi-Fi on your badge. I'm not wearing my badge anymore, but I used to be wearing it. As well as a number of charging stations on the opposite side of the venue. Our official event hashtag, also very important, is SPAN17. Please use it. The bathrooms are on the 5th floor, but it's very clear how to get there. You just follow the signs, and should you get lost, there will be a very friendly person wearing a SPAN17 t-shirt to help you find your way. If you need to leave an emergency, I'm going to do my flight attendant move and direct you to the lighted exit signs. For those watching at home by our live stream, welcome, and thanks for joining us from your respective locales. If you haven't already, please check out our handy viewing kit. It will give you tips for how to watch Span if you need tips on how to watch Span. And more importantly, it has information about our giveaway. So that can be found at design.google/SpanKit. And don't worry, you guys are all going to get swag bags too. They will be here tomorrow, so you have to come tomorrow. Also, for all of you that are here today, you will get a Span pin that is going to actually get you free access to a number of cultural venues that we've identified around Pittsburgh. So go, enjoy, go to museums, be cultural, and go for free. During the breaks, the space is yours to explore, so please do. We have a series of installations set up throughout both days, including an installation from the Andy Warhol Museum. You can do your own Andy Warhol screen test, as well as an installation from Deep Local, who collaborated with our Span team to create a self-painting art nebulizer, or the poster machine that's in the back of the venue. You should have all had your badge stamped, so look, check, see if your badge has been stamped. That number is going to correspond to a poster. So basically what will happen is throughout the day, I'll be announcing what posters are ready for pickup. We'll probably have some announcements over the intercom telling you which posters are ready. You can go get them and have your poster. Also, just check out the installation. It's really cool. So, without further ado, let's get started. I'm thrilled to introduce our first speaker, Madeline Gannon. Madeline's work focuses on inventing better ways to communicate with machines and blends disciplinary knowledge from design, robotics, and human-computer interaction to innovate at the edges of digital creativity. So join me in welcoming Madeline.
Hello. I am so delighted to be here to kick off Span, and I just want to say thank you to Google Design for bringing us all under this one roof, right? They've done an amazing job with the space, right? You guys excited for the whole weekend? Okay. My name is Madeline Gannon. I'm a designer, a researcher, and a robot whisperer. And I lead a research studio here in Pittsburgh called Automaton. And we are passionate about creating better ways to communicate with machines that make things. So today, I want to take some time to share with you how me and my studio are reimagining the future of automation. So automation is of particular interest here in Pittsburgh. This is the robotics capital of North America, and it is the exemplar post-industrial city for the US. And we've had an interesting relationship over the past 50 years with these machines. Automation brings many benefits. Now we have ways of creating things better, faster, cheaper, of higher quality, and to lower risk of human life. But we are now getting to a point where the balance of power between humans and machines is starting to shift in the machine's favor. Automation is rapidly outpacing job creation, and we're now facing a future where 5 million jobs by 2020 will be replaced due to rapid adaptation of robotic automation worldwide. But these machines are incredible. They have superhuman speed, superhuman endurance, superhuman reliability, precision, and I think we can all agree that it would be much better if we were able to find a way for these machines to enhance, to augment, and to expand our human capabilities, not replace them. And that's the future that I'm working to build. We should have some audio on here. Thank you. go up all
I'm
the way.
really passionate about inventing better ways to communicate with machines that can make things. For a long time, industrial robots have been the culprit of automation and replacing human labor. Basically, all the easy tasks to automate have been automated. Now what we're working on is using these tools to enhance or augment human labor. And that to me is very exciting. Industrial robots are really fantastic CNC machines. You put a different tool at the end of the arm, and all of a sudden they can do a whole different thing. So in the morning you can be doing spot welding, in the evening you can be doing painting. It's just highly adaptable. Another thing that I'm really working towards is finding ways to bring these machines out of factories and into live environments. So onto construction sites or onto film sets. There's chance for unpredictable objects like people to be moving into the environment. That's one of the reasons why I wanted to build the system, to give this robot eyes so that it could actually see me and we can safely collaborate in a shared space. If I'm wearing or if I'm holding these motion capture markers, it knows where I am in space, it knows how I'm moving in space. Now all of a sudden we can give the machine a nuanced understanding of our intention in that space. You can get someone who's never seen a robot before and have them begin to do creative things with just a couple minutes of interacting with the machine.
So a key theme in how I explore our future with robots is human-centered design. And when we think about our relationship to technology, oftentimes the burden is on a person to understand how a black box piece of software or hardware is supposed to be used, and we have to adapt to it. But human-centered design inverts this relationship. It works to build a shared understanding between a person, a machine, and the built environment. But for me, I didn't start working towards human-centered automation immediately with robots. I actually started working with these guys, these virtual squids. Just how to design with intelligent, autonomous creatures in ways that can extend your own imagination. So if anyone has tried 3D modeling before, it is the perfect use case for human-centered design. To do this accurately, you need to have a lot of technical knowledge and a lot of training in order to create something. So I wanted to try to see how intuitive I could make that. And I built a way to reach into the computer to create something with this tentacled collaborator that stretched the boundaries of my own imagination. So to make this a more human-centered interface for design, I embed the technical knowledge of an experienced fabricator into the underlying anatomy of this virtual creature. And in effect, this lets us take the technology and push it out of the way so that we can just get on with the business of crafting something really special with our tentacled collaborator. So what you get is that this virtual anatomy becomes these physical objects when they're taken out of the computer and brought back into the physical world through 3D printing. So this software system, Reverb, lets you 3D scan your body to pull it into the computer. It tracks your hand so you can drape intricate designs around your body, and it's instantly able to be exported, and it's already designed to fit and wear immediately. And so through this human-centered interaction with the fabrication technology, we get these strangely anatomical artifacts that are tailored to our bodies, that also push the absolute tolerances of the fabrication technique while creating exquisite forms that conform and deviate around from the body. And by embedding this ergonomics and human factors logic into this interactive, playful creature that we can engage with, we have these things that both conform to the body and expand on it. And this really got me thinking, it was amazing to reach into the computer to collaborate with this creature, but what if I could bring that geometry out and into the real world to directly engage with me? And if we're going to design digital things for the body, we might as well design them immediately on the body. So this system, Tactum, is able to detect your skin-centric interactions with your body, and it translates that to a CAD backend that you don't see that's inside a computer. And again, just like Reverb, all the fabrication knowledge is embedded in this geometry, so we can just print it and wear it right away. So here's some insights into how the system sees you. With the above-mounted camera, we see the skeleton of the body and segment the forearm from the hand. We then attach animate, playful geometry onto the forearm so it sticks with you and responds to you as you move through space. And then we can sense the other hand and where those finger gestures are and its proximity to your body in space to create these gestures for 3D modeling. So with just one above-mounted sensor, we can get a series of 9 distinct gestures that are quite useful for 3D modeling. And here for me was when I began to shift more towards robotics. So if we see that Reverb really brought this idea of intelligent, autonomous geometry that I can interact with, and Tactum gave me an avenue to bring that geometry out of the computer and onto the physical world to interact with me directly, I thought, why can't I do this with a robot? A 3D printer is a 3-axis robot. If I'm already feeding it to this machine, I could feed it to a robotic arm, a 6-axis robot. And evidently, there is good reason out there not to do this. These machines, when you scrape through the user manual, you are greeted with visions of your impending doom. And this holds true for industry as well. When you go into a factory, there is strict separation between robots and people. And there's good reason for this. These are made of hardened steel, and we are made of soft, squishy flesh, and those things don't often go well together. But part of approaching this problem as a designer and outside the world of robotics is that you often don't know the things you shouldn't do. So I've made a back massaging robot here. So you lean harder into it, and it leans harder into you, and you lean forward, and it goes a little softer. And I've also done a lot of work hacking and industrial robots to make cheaper, better hardware that's more open for people who may not have all the resources we need. And I've created open source software for doing creative things with robots, from character animation to again, responding in real time. I'm really passionate about doing anything to illustrate that there are alternative visions of how these machines can engage with us that have been perhaps overlooked and underutilized in industry in their pursuit of automation. And I was fortunate enough last year to be given an opportunity to take these ideas and bring them out of the lab and into a live environment at the Design Museum in London. They invited me to contribute to this inaugural exhibit, Fear and Love, and they asked me to think about, the complexities of our fear and love of automation. And I thought about my work with Abba here and how training her and learning her idiosyncrasies while also programming her, it reminded me a lot of Victorian zoos, where people would do feats of daring between trainers and giant beasts, or where you bring these exotic creatures to unfamiliar places for the general public. So in the Design Museum, we decided to bring an industrial robot to live there for the 6 months, to provide an opportunity as a point of first contact between the general public, who may not know it, but these robots impact the things that they use every day, and Mimas here. So it was an incredible opportunity to create a way for people to engage with this and really connect the body language of people visiting Mimas with her own body language and her own characteristics. So here we see some interaction vignettes that we developed prior to bringing her to life. And of course, you have to watch out for the selfie sticks. So this is how Mimas sees you. She doesn't see you through her face. Instead, just like the previous work that I showed, we use above-mounted sensors to see everyone walking around her. So unlike you and me, where we only have 2 eyes, Mimas has 8 eyes and sees depth. From there, we can extract certain things like your position, your time you've been there, your proximity to Mimas, and we can extract and begin to interpolate certain characteristics about you. If you're very, very close and you've been there for a long time, maybe you trust her. If you are short and you are jumping around, maybe you're a kid. And we built a ranking system for Mimas to go see who's the most interesting person, and then if you stop being interested, she gets bored and she goes to someone else, just like a tiger at the zoo. So here's what it looks like in effect, and these sensors hung in the ceiling that we had developed. The programming language we developed is really just directly connected to this machine. So now you don't have to program it. It's understanding how your body is moving into space and reacting to it, and you can internalize that information that she's broadcasting as well. And then in the Design Museum, the installers were having a little fun. The Design Museum just opened, so here these guys are installing the ceiling and messing around with Mimas on their break. But it was great to see, like one person walking down low and then coming up high when the people mover just drove past. So here she is in her enclosure, in her glass cage. And really, with this project, mostly when we see robots interacting with people, they have eyes, they have screens, they have human features. For Mimas, she has a really restricted palette to communicate her internal state of mind. She has the motion that she moves with, the posture that she holds, and the sound of her motors. Can we turn up the sound a little bit? So even with that really restrictive material palette, we can elicit a range of emotions from that. So here we see people who think that she's friendly and curious. Here we see people who are thinking she's a little more flirtatious. There's her motors. And even a little bit lewd with her gestures. And also very important, the people that thought it was creepy and that a little bit distrusting that this overtly dangerous machine is so cute. And these are all really important questions that we, as a collective, need to begin to process, because these large-scale autonomous machines are joining us in our built environment, in our cities. Pittsburgh is a great example of that with the self-driving cars that roam our streets now. So just how are we going to share our world with these machines? I don't have an answer. But it's pretty incredible how you give a machine a sense of movement and lifelike reaction, and people can't help but project your emotions onto it and create a more empathic bond with this lump of motors and steel. So I hope that this way sometimes you see it as a creature instead of a thing. But as we continue to march forward into the future, I am really bolstered by the fact that these kids here are growing up in a world where they are anticipating and expecting that their technology is attentive and empathic to their needs. And if there's one thing that I hope you take from this talk, I hope you feel emboldened that we are not bystanders to technology and that we have an active say in just how the future arrives. Thank you all. Thank you, Emma. Okay, sure. Actually,
Thank you, Madeline. Is it strange that I want to bring an industrial robot home to my house? I don't know. Our next panel will explore the diverse ways that we experience art in contemporary society through both practice, curation, and play. Desi Gonzalez is a researcher maker exploring the intersection of art and technology. She currently leads digital engagement at the Andy Warhol Museum. Paolo Pedercini is a game developer, artist, and educator. Since 2003, Pedercini has worked under the project name Mole Industria, producing provocative games addressing issues of social and environmental justice, religion, labor, and alienation. John Rubin is an interdisciplinary artist who creates interventions that reimagine individual, group, and institutional behavior. He's exhibited internationally and also here in Pittsburgh. I'm sure you guys have seen the Last Billboard Project, which is right around here somewhere. You've probably eaten at Conflict Kitchen. Our moderator, Aaron Lammer, is responsible for producing podcasts like Longform and Stoner, and will also be documenting and producing a series of Span podcasts for us. So please stay tuned for those. So without further ado, welcome Aaron and our panelists.
Okay, sit down.
Hello, Pittsburgh. I think we're going to hear a little bit from each of the panelists about their work. They're going to show some slides. This is work that sometimes you can look at, sometimes you can see, sometimes you need to climb on top of a building to see. But we'll get like a little overview of what everyone's up to, and then we'll all talk.
Yeah. What do you have?
Are we in the way of the images? Kind of sitting in front of the
My mic
images.
not on.
Say click.
Here we are.
Jesus.
Desi Gonzalez, ladies and gentlemen.
Hi, I'm Desi Gonzalez. I live here in Pittsburgh. I'm a writer, a researcher, a designer, a media maker, and I've gotten to write and research and media make and design a number of wonderful places. I've been at the Museum of Modern Art working on interactive exhibitions. I did a short stint at a residency at La Victoria Lab in Lima, Peru, which is a human-centered design lab started in conjunction with IDEO, and we worked on educational technology for the emerging middle class there. I did my graduate studies at MIT, where I focused on kind of the impacts of new media and technology from a humanistic and social science lens. And I'm now the manager of digital engagement at the Warhol, so I'm leading visitor-facing technology initiatives there. And I like to say that I work at the intersection of art and technology. When we think about art, we think about things like imagination, expression, nuance, subjectivity, and on the other hand, logic, code, binary, objectivity. Now, of course, these are really gross generalizations. We know that it's much more complicated than that, but what I like about working at that intersection, even though I don't necessarily consider myself an artist, is that I still get to blur these boundaries between the two, and that challenge kind of preconceptions. So, one way that I get to blur boundaries in my museum work is that I'm providing access in ways that were not previously possible. So if you were to go to the Warhol and go to our permanent collection galleries on each floor, you'd see a number of these tactile reproductions that you see on the left. The example I have here is of Warhol's painting Coca-Cola 2. And these are these raised line surface reliefs of iconic works in our collection, allowing a person to get an understanding of his works through the sense of touch. You can use that at the museum in conjunction with our audio guide Out Loud. And this is an audio guide that is available for all visitors, but that we designed in conjunction, in collaboration with folks who are visually impaired, who are blind or have low vision. So on the audio guide, we're combining educational content with accessible content. We're pushing out content based on where you're located in the galleries. And it was really, fantastic process for me to work on this, to work with community members who are blind and have low vision to build something that's, crafted specifically, to make a meaningful experience. And one of our co-designers, she's been blind her entire adult life. And she told me, when you think about a visual art museum, you don't necessarily think about a blind person coming here, right? A visual art museum. And we're really excited to flip this notion on its head. So I'm going to share a few more projects that kind of about, the intersection of art and technology and that I've worked on. This one's actually it's art related, but I did it while I was a graduate student, or at least started it. I've been thinking about, how can one thing I thought about a lot was how can you turn aesthetics into data and vice versa. A project I worked on were these art crayons. On the left, you'll see an early prototype. This is basically a bar graph, really. Each band in the crayon represents the amount of the top 5 colors. I took a painting, I put it through a color analysis script. I matched up those colors to Crayola colors, boxed a 120 pack of Crayola crayons, melted them down, and created these new ones. So the one on the left is of Georgia O'Keeffe's Music Pink and Blue No. 2 painting. And itself, the image is an abstract work in the first place. So, there's a tension going on with this work where in the first place, I was interested in taking messy cultural data and putting it into a neat kind of database. And on the other hand, it's absurd to be taking something that's abstract and abstracting it in another form. And I really enjoyed that. The crayons on the right, I made more recently. I made those actually once I was already at the Andy Warhol Museum. And in my role working on digital projects, I face a limitation, which is that we don't own the intellectual property to the works in the Warhol collection for most of them. It makes my work a little bit difficult. I can't show you an image of a Warhol work right now, even though Warhol works are some of the most iconic artworks in the world, right? But in this way, I was able to circumvent, I can now show you these art crayons. The third crayon with the big band of white, that's a Campbell soup can. You guys might have an image of that in your brain. So it's the white background that dominates the crayon with a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, or rather gray and black, and then a tiniest bit of gold, and that represents kind of the soup can's label. So this is my way to kind of circumvent those limitations. And then a final project I want to share with you, and then I'll be moving on, is just how can we use technology to take us to a different time and space through art as well. And right outside of this area, you may have seen that we have a screen test machine set up. We also have one of these. This is an image from my museum, the Andy Warhol Museum. Warhol, between 1964 and 1965, he created almost 500 of these screen tests where he would have someone come to his factory studio, sit in front of a little Bolex camera. There's a 100-foot reel of film in it. He would let it run the entire time, which is about 3 minutes, capture this image, kind of a close-up, very intimate shot. And then he would play them back in the studio at a slowed-down pace, slightly slower, and it would result in this very ethereal, silent film, almost a character study. At the museum, we are able to be in the factory studio yourself, sit for a screen test, in the screen test machine, you yourself can sit down and have your video recorded, and then it'll get sent to you at the slower pace. And what I love about this interactive is that it allows you to be the art, to be in the 1960s, to imagine what it would have been like to be in Warhol's studio. So thank you.
All right, what's up? Hi, I'm Paolo Pedercini. I have a stupid slide here. So yeah, I'm from Italy originally, and I've been living in Pittsburgh for about 8 years, so where I teach at Carnegie Mellon University. But I mostly work under the project name Molindustria. Can you lower the volume? We don't really need, yeah, it's pretty loud. So I've been making essentially games, political, satirical, experimental games under the name Molindustria for about 10, almost like 15 years actually. And the idea is to use games as a form of communication, as a form of satire, but also to mess with the language of video games or mainstream video games, all of them. So kind of like responding and questioning the tropes and the mechanics that we take for granted, and try to foster a kind of a critical thinking toward this language of video games, because I believe video games have their own language that is and not just embedded in the stories and the characters, but also in the mechanics and in the systems that they kind of like enact. So what the designers decide to include and what they decide to exclude, for example. So some of my games are kind of meant to actually encourage some kind of system thinking around actual complex systems that we live in. For example, this one was an old one called the McDonald's video games, in which you are managing the McDonald's company as this sort of like CEO through this dislocated, globalized production process, and it's meant to sort of illustrate all the questionable aspects of the supply chain. Yeah. This other one, click, yeah, is actually uses storytelling. It's called Phone Story, and it's a kind of an educational game for smartphones, mostly iPhones and Android phones. And it also talks about the production process of the device itself from the perspective of the phone. The phone is sort of like talks to you and kind of like implicates you in this process, in this problematic process. And you go from the coltan mines in Congo to the Foxconn factory, where that was a moment, it's funny, but not. There was a moment in which there was like a wave of suicides, you know, like literally people tossing themselves off the buildings, of these factory buildings and so on. So there is a bit of dark humor, but it's mostly educational. You hear this kind of voice talking about it. Yeah, Apple didn't like it, and they banned it from the store. It's still on Android, though. Thank you, Google. So this one is called To Build a Better Mousetrap, and it's also about a supply chain process, a management game. But it's a bit more abstract, and it's meant to kind of distill and dramatize the conflicts of late capitalism, in particular the conflict between innovation and labor, like automation and innovating products versus innovating processes, and so on. So next. This one is, the next one is called Nova Lea, and it's, I like this to combine this idea of storytelling and simulation. So this is the first of a series of city games that are meant to talk about, let's say that to be a kind of an alternative to SimCity. Everybody knows SimCity, and everybody knows this kind of all-encompassing, ambitious simulation of urban environments. And this one is meant to just focus on one very specific aspect of urbanism through video game, which is gentrification and financial speculation through real estate. So it's basically a kind of like a house flipping simulation, and at some point, click next. And at some point, you also encounter a kind of resistance from below, and you see the invisible citizens are essentially like rising up and adding new rules and new systems that are kind of pointing to rent control measures or anti-speculation measures that force you to rethink your strategy and so on. Click next. So this one is the next one that is coming up is it's called Unmanned, and it's a narrative game in which you're playing as a drone pilot. It's a game about a day in the life of a drone pilot. And it's all presented through this split screen or double channel screen, kind of meant to almost like mirror the disconnection that I imagine these fighters and pilots have in living their lives, so essentially in a suburban normal family in Las Vegas, but also being on the front lines. And this one, I'm gonna go fast. Click, click. The next one is this is a more recent one for VR. It's called A Short History of the Gaze. And I call it an experiential essay about the relationship between looking at things and VR, mostly because a lot of what you do in VR is kind of like looking at things, but the gaze is never really problematized in some kind of way. There's a lot of talk about VR as an empathy machine, or as a kind of, to promote empathy, but I kind of wanted to create a little bit more critical distance and create a game or an experience that was not really about, feeling the world seeing the world through the eyes of a refugee or something, but actually more conveying a set of ideas that are a bit more abstract, a little bit more theoretical. So in the game, you're basically like going through a series of vignettes, going from the development of vision in a Precambrian creature to panopticon and so on. So some things happen in this country that made me kind of like question essentially what am I even doing with my life as a designer, and like making like this very academic sort of games and so on. And I guess like my first immediate response was a compilation of games called Casual Game for Protesters, which is a series of games that are not digital. They are analog folk games, street games that require very little preparation and very little, almost no technology. What it is essentially, a collection of games to be played in the context of protests, marches, occupations that are meant to kind of enrich these experiences and kind of fight boredom within, because every time I go to a rally or a march, I'm kind of like bored. And so like these are kind of like things that you can do to pass time, but also in a sort of thematically related way. And the idea is to produce experiences that are transformative in themselves. I think like activism should be like immediately and inherently transformative, also for the people who participate, regardless of the political effect that it can have. And so, I think there is a role for games and for experienced designers in this particular field. And you can play many other games at the website, Mall Industria. They are all free. And yes, thank you.
Hi, am I really loud? It seems loud. Okay, thanks. I'm John Rubin. I also live in Pittsburgh, and I'm the grad director at Carnegie Mellon School of Art and an artist here. Don't know why I'm on this panel. But I'm going to show the work. I'm going to show 3 projects that I made within probably 500 feet from where we're sitting right now. The first one started 8 years ago, and the last one's still going. And so this is the sort of 3 projects that developed a billboard, the waffle shop, and Conflict Kitchen. But kind of walking you through the process of that, I rented a space that had been empty for over 3 years, right on the corner of Highland and Balm, and started having classes there. And out of those classes, we developed this project called the Waffle Shop, and it was something that developed as a reality TV show, which was a complete disaster, as every reality TV show is. And then morphed into this thing, which was a live streaming talk show that happened every time this faux, which became real restaurant, was open. So essentially, we opened a waffle shop, and people streamed in thinking, hey, this is a restaurant where I can get waffles. And then there was this kind of bait and switch, in which in the back of the restaurant there was also a talk show where our customers were coaxed to be participants. We would then live stream it over the internet in a very lo-fi way. And what was kind of interesting to me was to try to create a space in the public realm that seems both normative and absurd, that wouldn't normally happen if perhaps an artist didn't intervene. And what you had was every day, people who might not normally be engaging with each other are coming into this waffle shop, being coaxed into conversations, and there's a kind of stream of consciousness documentary of whoever happens to occupy this space at that moment being broadcast out into the world. So I was really interested in a very visceral person-to-person experience that is often mediated by technology and television, being kind of available and very lo-fi. So over the 6 years that this project ended up running, we had over 10,000 people who sort of became the performers. And it was nice because anyone who walked in and bought a waffle was a funder. If you sat down to eat, you became a viewer, and if you were coaxed onto the stage, you became a presenter. Thus, any individual walking in could perform every role the institution needed. And it was a sort of non-hierarchical model that was constructed in the middle of the city. Out of that project, I worked with another artist, Don Waleski, and we created Conflict Kitchen, which actually started right out of the side door of the waffle shop. So initially, we were running 2 restaurants out of 1 kitchen. And the idea with Conflict Kitchen, which ended up lasting for 7 years and is about to translate into another iteration, was to think about not only Pittsburgh, but something that could happen in the entire United States. What is missing from our discourse? What is the byproduct of our xenophobia and ignorance? And how does that manifest not just in policy, but in discourse amongst each other on the street? So we took kind of the mechanisms that were working in the waffle shop, which is we got food as a way to coax people into conversation with each other, and we targeted that much more specifically around countries that the United States was in conflict with. So every 4 to 5 months, we would switch and focus on a new country. We would then travel oftentimes, this is sort of later in the project when we had some income to do so, to Palestine, work with North Korean refugees or Cubans, and then bring all that, both the information and the food and the recipes and relationships with local communities that are from those nations, and use this kind of window, kind of like we were using the talk show as a sort of mechanism to engage conversation that wasn't ordinarily happening. Also as a tool to disseminate information that is either uncomfortable or unfamiliar to people. So again, using this material of this, of your food that bypasses your intellect. So these are kind of anti-technology. These are old technologies of recipes being the original open source form, right, that everyone shares, and transfigures in many ways. So we moved to Shenley Plaza about 5 years ago. We focused on North Korea. We focused on Palestine. We focused on Iran. We had a whole education and outreach program, a live trivia show when you're waiting in line, publications about kids who are living in those countries, interviews with Cubans asking them to write a speech they wish Barack Obama would deliver, then hiring a Barack Obama imitator to deliver it, then hiring an even better one to produce it for television. This is a live Skype meal between Pittsburgh and Tehran, which we did several times, where we ate the same foods together. We started to work with local organizations. This is the Islamic Center, school groups, virtual dinner parties or dinner cooking lessons where someone in Iran, a chef, would cook for people all over the world in their home kitchens. So basically, after about 7 years, the project closed its location, and we've received a grant to check the feasibility of actually taking this project into other cities across the United States. And we have another model for how we're going to manifest it in Pittsburgh. And then finally, the last billboard, which I think was brought up briefly, is a project that started in a space that used to be occupied by a conventional advertising that was pulled out, and I asked the landlord if I could use that and remodify the system to create a kind of anti-advertising system. So basically, the way the last billboard works is yeah, that's a good one. That actually was right after the election. So the way the last billboard works is we literally get up there and it takes about 6 hours by hand to take these very heavy wooden letters and put them up, and they end up lasting, even though it sort of has the appearance perhaps of a tweet, it stays up there in this incredibly material way for, it sort of, I guess, confounds your expectation of how text should exist in the public realm and what it should be saying, and becomes a really facile venue for me to work with artists all over the world and bring them in and, bring really, I think, like kind of beautiful sentiments and perspectives. And this is Mark Horowitz, who just put his phone number up there. Adam Freeland, who did this piece. It's called The Crier, which has 3 different interpretations of crier. And this is Kim Beck, a piece that she recently did. So that's also been going on for about 6 years. So I'm really interested in being a resident in Pittsburgh, that my work takes place here in a very physical way, and that it's an opportunity for me to engage with my community. That said, a project I'm currently working on, and I have been for 3 years, is developing a sitcom that's going to be jointly produced in an apartment in Tehran and a space here in the United States. So I could talk more about that perhaps, but that's it.
Thanks to everyone. Wow. John said he didn't know why he was on this panel. And so it made me think about what united all 3 of your work. And the thing that occurred to me was that all of your work requires other people. If no one goes and physically experiences it, it doesn't really happen. If no one comes into the waffle shop, if no one plays the game, if no one touches the Coca-Cola bottle, the art doesn't really mean much at all. I'm curious, when you take these projects out of the theoretical academic stage and unleash the forces of humanity on them, what have you learned from the way that people actually interact with art and technology that differs from your plans? What happens when the games get played and when the people show up? I guess I'll start with Desi. In your experiences in the museum, what have been some surprises about when you set up something like the screen test and people actually screen test?
Yeah, so I think the screen test is maybe my favorite interactive that we have at the Andy Warhol Museum. Once I was we have it kind of tucked away in a little gallery, not so dissimilar to here, but I was in there. A woman was wrapping up her screen test. Her friend was standing on the side. They were very silent. All of a sudden, the lights go out at the end of her her time doing the screen test. We have this like the whirring sound that we're emulating of the camera, and then her shoulder slumped, and she goes, like, wow, I didn't realize how tiring it would be to be sitting for so long and concentrating and having kind of this intimate moment with the camera. And to me, that was a really successful moment. It was kind of a moment of friction for someone at a museum. It's a little strange you go there to see other things. You don't go there to be seen yourself necessarily. There's a moment of discomfort for her, but it also gave her a sense of what it's like to be a participant in to be, with the activity of being in art, being a subject of it, what that takes. So,
Paolo, when you're developing these games, in art generally people kind of just put it out and interpret it yourself. In technology, there's user experience and affordances. How much do you consider the actual gameplay? Like, are you user testing the orgasm simulation?
Yeah, sometimes. No, that one I didn't test. It is a bit of a problem because we are. There are a lot of moving parts in a game that contribute to the type of interpretation that you get, especially if the game has an intent that is perhaps conveying a certain message or a range of messages. Let's say that. I don't like to think that my games have a message or a moral, but there is definitely a field of meaning that I'm interested in you falling in. Sometimes it's a problem. Like one example is that once I made a game that was considered too hard by some players, and and it was like, oh, this game is too hard. It means that there's no hope in the world because you always end up, being kicked in the butt. And
the people coming out of the windows
so
do
like
not
they were
get caught.
like making an interpretation, for example, right?
Yeah.
And so it was like kind of like overnight, I tweaked some variables and made it easier. But then like other players were like, oh, this game is so easy. That clearly means that it was a game about like WikiLeaks. So it clearly means that the leaks are going to change the world and whatever. And I was like, that's not exactly what I want. So in that case, the solution was a design solution, which is the dynamic difficulty adjustment. That means that the game is responding to your player and kind of like getting harder depending on the kind of like the skill level of the player, for example. But sometimes you don't have kind of like an easy design problem. And what I've been thinking more about is to create games or toys or tools that allow to play subversively, like that, to allow the player to kind of like break them and do different, possibly unexpected things with them.
John, when you're taking on a project like the project that started as the waffle shop, and I think became all of the projects that came after it, how do you think about a project that has no finite beginning or end like that? And what's the decision-making process like? Like, who decides to open the conflict kitchen next to the waffle shop once that's going?
I mean, I was thinking about what Paolo was talking about. And again, maybe I'm translating it not into an online universe, but into, a daily life, because it is very much a call and response process. Being just hanging out in the waffle shop every day, shit happens, life happens, people come up to you, they say things, you thus respond, the billboard becomes empty, you drive up and say, what if? The guy who has a business next to you opens a hot dog shop right outside of your waffle shop, and you're like, maybe we should compete against him and create a takeout restaurant, and what if we did? What kind of takeout restaurant would that be? And all of a sudden, like, tumbles forth a line of thinking that relates to other interests that I have. And so, it's so completely non-linear, and partially I'm responding to like extremely idiosyncratic personal interests, and I'm also responding simultaneously to what I'm seeing in a kind of a local public sphere of interest, and then I'm looking at this kind of global zeitgeist of, the conflict kitchen became a place that could unpack things that were happening geopolitically that seemed quite distant. Say the Iranian negotiations were heating up. We could focus on Iran and kind of look at it in an incredibly different perspective here in our own little footprint. So it's a constant dance of putting something out and watching what happens.
You all work in a medium that didn't really exist historically, this space between art and technology and the public space. Well, I shouldn't say that. It always existed, but there aren't necessarily institutions to support it all over the place. There isn't a MoMA for video games. Games are starting to move into museums, but these are works that don't fit neatly into any established package. You can't open it at a Soho gallery and have a big party with wine. Well, I guess I'll start with Desi. You run an institution where you actually can do this kind of stuff. So where do you find people to do this kind of stuff? For people who would want to make work like this, what are the career paths like for? What do you tell people you're looking for at the Andy Warhol Museum?
So in a role similar to mine, these are jobs that I'm one of the first people in this role at my museum. I think museums aren't very good at knowing what technology needs they need. Like the people who are running museums are often curators or come from that kind of background. So it's actually a really fantastic opportunity to be a novice and just start from the beginning and just test out and experiment. And they didn't know that I lacked a lot of the skills that I needed for my job when I started. And it was cool. I learned it on the job. But I do think that, so you're asking, like, what are we looking for? What do we need?
What was the skill you were most lacking?
What was the skill I was, Yeah, just like kind of boring like servers and stuff like that you can figure out, right? I mean, sorry if you're into servers, but I think what museums are looking for is people who are creative, people who are also sensitive to the content we're working with, right? Like we're at my museum where we have the legacy of this one artist, and his work is really complex. There are many ways you could tell this story. So we want someone who is really interested in new technologies, really aware that Warhol experimented with technologies, but also keeping his spirit in mind in a authentic. Warhol was kind of authentic, kind of not, but keeping that in mind when we're creating these new experiences.
Paolo, when you have a new game out, where do you show it? Where do you premiere it?
Yeah, no, that's an interesting question, and I'm actually quite into that kind of question, actually. So games have been in and out of galleries for like 20 years at least. So it's not completely unseen that you have an opening in Soho, like with sipping wine and playing a game. My problem is that, and if there has been a push toward the institutionalization, let's recognize, this thing as a design, and they are like, there is Pac-Man in the MoMA and so on, and they are like in the design and furniture section, but still, it is in the MoMA. The problem with it is that they don't sit very well in the MoMA. Like they don't sit very well in those like white spaces. And what I'm working on right now, I never announced it. I don't want to announce it, but what I'm working right now is like essentially like creating a different kind of space and kind of like try to disrupt a bit the white cube. In the same way, if you think essentially the video art, in order to be enjoyed in a gallery, had to sort of like transform it, and that's why you sometimes have like sort of like small cinemas, or you have more like a paradigm of like a complete darkness in a gallery, so you can have a projection and so on. So I'm thinking of like what would that be for interactive artworks that might not be hanging on a wall, or might not be enjoyable in in just like 3 seconds, or like with a glance, and maybe they require a little bit more time. And the response is that I'm basically like turning my garage into a gallery for video games. So stay tuned.
I was gonna ask if there was people thought there would be dedicated institutions for this kind of multidisciplinary work, and it sounds like the first one is opening in your garage.
It's definitely not the first one. There are a few definitely different models in several cities. It will be probably the first one in Pittsburgh.
John, when you've completed this project, you've got God knows how many hours of live streamed video, you've got photographs, you've got just like tons of stuff. How do you think about repackaging that, not for the audience who experienced it in real time, but someone like our audience here who are experiencing it in retrospect?
Yeah, it's a challenge. I mean, there's sort of like the indigenous audience that experiences these things, but as artists, we're really conscious and have always been about how stories are told in different ways. Even the same story can be told in different contexts and have different meanings. So, for some people, just the title of things, just the title Conflict Kitchen has an evocation for people in, Portugal, and without actually experiencing the project. And that's fine for me. I mean, Lenka Clayton, who's going to speak later, and I just finished a project in New York, which is called A Talking Parrot, a Punjabi TV show, a high school drama class, a museum artwork, a congregation's call to action, and the oldest song in the world, Circle Through New York. Done. So, there's something to me really evocative in the title, but the project was like massive 6-month undertaking with millions of things going on. And so I think it's okay that you don't have to be there. And it's okay that there's definitely in the art world a kind of, the aura of an object that moves around and has this quality that can be traded on the market. And I'm frankly just not that compelled by it.
What kind of reactions do you get when you cross these boundaries between tech and art in the public space? I'm curious, like, what kind of reactions, more technology-based, like for instance, like your crayon piece. How does that play to a tech audience versus a art audience, and is there any distinction?
I mean, yeah, of course there's a distinction, and can I answer your question a little bit differently?
You can actually just go wherever you like.
I mean, I do think that in art museums, so I thought you were going to go in this direction, or at least this is something I faced a lot, is that there can be a resistance to technology.
Yeah.
Outside of art museums, there's a resistance to art and contemporary art.
That's what I was really asking, except I was trying
right.
to not make it negative.
Yeah.
Kind of ruin the question.
But sorry about that. But it's interesting to see where that comes from and to see why people feel that way. And I do agree. You know, sometimes we're using technology in places where we don't need it. But there are ways in which technology has really, I don't know, I think about our audio guide and the tactile reproductions where we are able to make the museum accessible to the visually impaired community here in Pittsburgh by offering these things. I think there's a lot of writing in kind of like museum reviews and art criticism about museums being overly enthusiastic about digital. And I also, you know, I love my working with technology and working digital engagement, but I just as much love designing solutions that don't require technology.
I mean, some of the same stuff applies to something like games, where you can have an academically dense treatise about a game, and then you open it up to you know, the Reddit forum of the world, and it's a different kind of response. What's it like making work for both of those audiences?
Yeah. When it started, it was weird. I mean, like, people thought it was weird, and there was a little bit of pushback, and there is still like kind of like a lot of backlash, or like, keep your politics out of my games, you know, like on my hobby, and especially when the game creators are, for example, like women or people coming from marginalized communities and role, and there you have like the sort of like the gamer dude being like very upset about that, kind of like girls, like feminists stealing my toys and things like that. I think things are getting a little bit better, to be honest, but to me, part of the necessary conversation is to recast or remind that games are not really technological objects, but they are more related to, you know, play, and games that, you know, predates digital technologies, predates even like language and culture, because even like animals play, you know, so that's, to me, part of the kind of like a reframing. Like, video games are not just like digital medias, but they are like part of this like long tradition. So
I think we're on our last question here, which I'll put out to John. It's a similar question, which is, if maybe Paolo irritates some gamers with his games, I would imagine that you confuse a certain amount of the population with these works. When someone walks into the waffle shop and there's not waffles, there's a live stream, and they say, "What is this? What are you doing?" How do you explain your work?
Well, there is waffles.
There
were waffles.
There's not only
waffles. It's important
waffles.
to know there were definitely waffles, and a live stream.
You explain there are waffles.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, the languages I'm using are common. They're shared. They're not hard to interpret.
Yeah.
So I'm rearranging them in ways that they're not normally existing, and I might be speaking about subjects that aren't usually presented in public life, but I find it very easy. Yeah. I mean, I find it sometimes more difficult when I'm in a museum where people are sort of over-interpreting and missing the kind of humanity that's the entry point of the work. And just sort of looking for criticality as its point. I was also just back to this question of like, how does technology affect work that kind of happens in real life? Like The Last Billboard is a funny project because it's completely unbranded. There's no way, you don't even know, most people have no idea I'm involved with it. It's just up there enigmatically. But yet it has 50,000 followers on Tumblr. So it's like when I post it on the website, which is a Tumblr site, it has this huge, weird, 14-year-old following, and then it has this kind of strange mystery following in Pittsburgh where they don't really know what's going on. I like those kind of universes can collide. And the same thing with something like Conflict Kitchen, where it has a massive international following to it, but it's very much kind of like when I throw the rock into the pond, the first ripple needs to happen here. But I'm conscious that all of the subsequent ones are just as valuable, and certain technologies kind of expand that, the capacity of the stone to resonate.
Well, thank you to all of the panelists.
Thank you, Aaron, and our panelists. Our next speaker, I'm sure some of you might know, Wright Steenson is a designer, writer, and international speaker whose work focuses on the intersection of architecture, design, and artificial intelligence. She's an associate professor at CMU School of Design. Welcome, Molly, to the stage.
Hi. So I spend a lot of time thinking about AI and design, and I'm struck by the fact that maybe it isn't always so straightforward for how designers are going to end up working with AI. Though I have to say one thing about this event, especially seeing how Madeline kicked off everything, we start seeing some really great opportunities for how we think about the interactions between people and machines and human-centered design in AI. But if we ask Google, as in google.com, not Google Span, what does AI look like? We get pictures like this, and I have to admit, I've started collecting them. You notice they're always this kind of blue, right? And there's this vortexy head. If anyone here has ever listened to the band Kraftwerk, it looks like their old videos from the 80s. Here's that blue again. I'm not sure what's going on with his hand. Then there's Cyborg Lady. I like Cyborg Lady a lot. This is apparently jQuery going on over her face, so I'm not sure what that says about the future. And when I do a Google image search, this comes up. And look at this. You see that same blue and that black and the ghosty, cyborgy faces and everything like that. And if we look at movies, I'm not sure that it's really all that much better. The place we all start is Minority Report. And everybody probably saw Her. And so here we see Joaquin Phoenix being bummed out as he's waiting for his new assistant to download. Or you get the fembot. The fembot cliche is a big one. So Ex Machina, very interesting movie, beautiful location in Norway, creepy protagonist, creepy bot. And the mother or father of them all, HAL 9000. I'm sorry, Dave, I can't do that. If you think about it, too, HAL came out in 1968. And so what if we look instead for AI as the new? So we get AI is the new black. AI is the new UI. McKinsey says that artificial intelligence is the next digital frontier. Andrew Ng says AI is the new electricity. But now he's left Baidu, and he's doing an online course called deeplearning.ai to educate people to take part in an AI-powered society. You need data for AI to be possible in any of its senses, so data is the new oil. Then we get other kinds of things, like this one. The future of computers is the mind of a toddler, or this really freaky disembodied head. And when I type in AI invents, I get a couple of interesting responses. It invents language, recipes. It invents its own language. Google, I'm sorry, you didn't actually invent AI, but I'll get to that in a second. And some of the people around here who have seen me talk in classes since the beginning of the school year might know this. AI can invent colors. So Janelle Shane, a researcher, fed a neural network a bunch of color names and RGB values from paint swatches, like from the paint store. And it came up with names like Burble Simp and Stoomy Brown, Stoner Blue. I'm not sure if you've got a favorite. There's one called Dope, another called Testing. She's also come up with things like 80s band names, action figure names, death metal band names, and Pokemon names, and guinea pig names. And sometimes she puts them all together to invent even more new things. We see things like the future of robotic communication. Facebook's AI bots invented a new language and started talking to each other, and that got shut down. You might have heard about this in the last couple of weeks. And it even turns out that I am AI. The Grid.ai has Molly, their AI web designer, and Golan Levin took umbrage at this, this really sexualized, embarrassing AI bot that will never ghost you, will always take your calls. So it's really kind of awful and embarrassing. And the fact is, at the end of it all, people like Elon Musk are saying that this is a new era of artificial intelligence. And the fact is that AI isn't the new anything, because AI isn't new. So if we look back to where AI comes from, it's 1955 when John McCarthy coins the term artificial intelligence. There were a couple of other names in contention at that point in time. Automata studies lost out, probably better for the rest of us. And he referred to it as making machines do things that would require intelligence if done by man. And in the summer of 1956, he gathered a group of researchers together at Dartmouth College, to work on the kind of the platform of research interest for AI. And these included things like neural networks and machine learning and game playing. 1956. And if you look closely in this picture, you'll see people like Ivan Sutherland, Marvin Minsky's in there, Frank Rosenblatt. A number of the AI pioneers got together then. So that's how old this stuff is. It's about your parents' age, maybe grandparents. And it's even older than that. Arthur Samuel popularized the term machine learning starting in 1952 when he taught a machine how to play checkers. And so the machine would learn from itself and grow and change, and over time it would play a better game of checkers than the person who wrote the program. In 1958, we get neural nets and perceptrons coming in the work of Frank Rosenblatt. And in 1961, Marvin Minsky, who's the co-founder of the MIT AI Lab and was at MIT until his death last year, he said that, "I believe that we are on the threshold of an era that will be strongly influenced and quite possibly dominated by intelligent problem-solving machines." It's kind of funny. It's like what Elon Musk said, that we're at the verge of a new era in artificial intelligence. But this is what Marvin Minsky had to say in 1961. So what does that mean for designers? The fact is that AI and design are not strangers. In fact, they're friends, and also old friends. And I come at it from an angle of architecture, where architecture and AI collaborated with a number of different crossovers. It's the subject of my upcoming book, Architectural Intelligence. It'll be out in November. But I wanted to tell you about two people or two groups of people. The first one, the guy with the windshield wipers on his glasses, is Cedric Price. And the second one is Nicholas Negroponte. Nicholas Negroponte you might be familiar with because he founded the MIT Media Lab. But before that, he founded a group called the Architecture Machine Group. And the Architecture Machine Group worked very closely in collaboration with the AI Lab at MIT, starting in 1967, to develop interfaces for artificial intelligence. So, Cedric Price. This is the architect that you may not have heard of, but I think he's the secret patron saint of interaction designers. He's not known for what he built. In fact, he didn't build very much. One of the things he did build was the Snowdon Aviary at the London Zoo. So you might see that there if you go to the London Zoo. And he had this idea with this structure that maybe he could put it there, and then maybe you could eventually remove it, and maybe the birds would stay, or maybe they wouldn't. And he kind of didn't care, because he would say things like, technology's the answer. But what was the question? And maybe he'd say, you don't need a new house. Maybe you need a divorce. Maybe you need a walk in the park. He belonged to RIBA, the Royal Institute of British Architects, and also the British Demolition Society. And he was the only architect to belong to both. So you see, he's so much fun. This is an image from the Fun Palace, and it's what he's probably best known for. And between 1963 and 1970, he and Joan Littlewood tried to get it built. Joan Littlewood was a radical British director, stage director, and a protege of Bertolt Brecht. And the deal with the Fun Palace is all of these parts were mobile. And you could combine them to do whatever you wanted. It was kind of a leisure center, because in the 60s, they were addressing the fact that maybe automation was going to put us all out of jobs, sound familiar? And we'd need to find things to replace them. And so maybe we'd want to come to a place like Fun Palace, which was like a theater or a school, but not a school, or something, some really kind of crazy, interesting place. And he convened a cybernetic committee to be a part of the Fun Palace. One of the things the cybernetic committee did is built this schematic of how people would interact in moving through the Fun Palace. So if you look here, you might see that it says, input of unmodified people, output of modified people. You interact with the building, it interacts with you, you change the building, it learns what you want, it changes in accordance to your preferences, and changes you too. So it's a pretty radical idea. And part of these ideas came because Cedric Price worked closely with a guy named Gordon Pask. And Gordon Pask, beyond being pretty out there, was someone who had a very interesting idea of how to turn on its head our design paradigms. So he wrote in this article in 1969, let us turn the design paradigm in upon itself, let us apply it to the interaction between the designer and the system she designs, rather than the interaction between the system and the people who inhabit it. That's a different thing. Like, think of when you're using Photoshop, you expect it to do your bidding. What if it starts doing something different? What if the possibilities emerge are something that you couldn't think of on your own and it couldn't do on its own? Maybe it's something different altogether. There's a project that Cedric Price did later on. Again, it wasn't built, in 1976, called Generator. And Generator was to be in the Florida Panhandle. It was going to be a site with a bunch of cubes, sort of 12-foot by 12-foot cubes, walkways, ramps, barriers. You see a rendering of what it might have looked like there. Again, there for whatever you might like to do in an arts retreat. And in fact, they solicited a lot of questions and possibilities of what people could do with the space. He had quizzes and games to kind of figure it out. These get put together in menus for Generator, and I love these drawings because they tell stories. If you look down here, it says this one particular intersection of pathways that maybe you would be wandering in Generator, say, excellent, full of event and taught action. And this round one here, very good, walk around to all the angles. So Generator would have a number of layouts from the get-go, and you could then make changes to Generator as per what you wanted to do. So he was very fascinated with mobile cranes, and these mobile cranes would come and move the parts of Generator, again, on this grid. So it would come together something like this. And then finally, you've got your front panels and some steps, and you can hang out. And he realized along the way, even though he had kind of a cruise director who had a social role who would have encouraged people to change Generator, that people tend not to ask their architecture to move around for them. So he started working with John and Julia Fraser, who were computer scientists, on a set of programs for Generator. And there were 4 programs that they proposed. One is a perpetual architect, which were the rules for the components and structures of Generator. One was an inventory of all of the equipment. So all of the equipment would have sensors on it, would have microcontrollers, so they could report whether they were in use and where. And again, I'll remind you that this is 1978 at this point, so this is decades ago. Number 3, what you see right here is a modeling kit. You could move around these plexiglass blocks, and it would plot on the computer screen, and it would print out. So that was also quite unusual. But the 4th one, and it's something that you might have seen with Mimis and Madeline Gannon's talk, was the boredom program. In the event of the site not being reorganized or changed for some time, the computer starts generating unsolicited plans and improvements. And in a letter to Cedric Price, John Fraser wrote, if you kick a system, the very least you would expect it to do is kick you back. And then in the letter in handwriting, he said, "You seem to imply that we were only useful if we produced results that you did not expect. I think this leads to some definition of computer aids in general. At least one thing that you would expect from any half-decent program is that it should produce at least one plan you did not expect." So what does that tell us? Generator is considered to be, excuse me, one of the first examples of an intelligent building. And there have been a number of people over the years who've suggested that it might have been the first proposal for an artificially intelligent building. Unfortunately, the project was canceled, but John Fraser tried to work with Cedric Price until Cedric Price's death in 2003 to get this built. And today we might actually have the possibility of being able to do it with the technology that we have. All right, so Nicholas Negroponte. Lots of pictures and lots of gestures here of Nicholas. And he founded the MIT Architecture Machine Group with his colleague Leon Greusser in 1967. And the Architecture Machine Group, I should mention, was half engineers and half architects at MIT. They worked very closely, as I mentioned, with the AI lab at MIT and collaborated to design interfaces for artificial intelligence projects. And they were also defense funded in the same way that the AI lab mostly was. So the things that the Architecture Machine Group built were things that the Office of Naval Research, or DARPA, were interested in. And one of the first things, I want to go back one slide. He wrote a book in 1970 called The Architecture Machine, and he dedicated that book to the first machine that can appreciate the gesture. So when you see the images that I had before of him and all of his pointing, there's always a gesture in his images. And this book is actually a theory of artificial intelligence in architecture. One of the first projects that the Architecture Machine Group did was a project called Urban 5, and it was a conversational user interface for architecture, for architectural design. And what the user would do is point with a light pen and move blocks around and then assign certain modes to the blocks. So you can see right here that there's a set of buttons that you could push to assign certain modes to these blocks. And you'd have a conversation with the computer in order to do this design work. And you see other images here. These are from the Architecture Machine. And then you'll also notice that there's one image that says, "Ted, many conflicts are occurring." And I don't know how many of you have tried to design a chatbot or a conversational user interface, but you know it's really hard. And it turns out it was really hard in 1965 with Joseph Weizenbaum and Eliza, and it was really hard in 1972. Ted, many conflicts are occurring. I did mention again that Marvin Minsky and Seymour Papert were very, very close friends of Negroponte throughout their lives. And Negroponte worked closely with Minsky and the AI lab. This is a robotic arm that's stacking blocks. And in 1970, at the software show at the Jewish Museum, the Architecture Machine Group had a piece called Seek. And you'll notice here, again, that robotic arm, another version of that robotic arm that we saw with Marvin Minsky is stacking these mirrored blocks. And if you look closely down in front, you'll see that there are some inhabitants in this mirrored block city. There are gerbils. Do you see the gerbils? And the gerbils do what gerbils do, which is to nudge around blocks and make a mess. And the blocks and Seek did what they're meant to do, which is stack the blocks. And it's difficult to see, but here in the lower corner it says gerbils match widths with computer built environment. And this is a gatefold of the software show catalog, Life in a Computerized Environment. And the project wasn't successful for a number of reasons, and for that matter, the entire software show was not successful. It almost bankrupted the Jewish Museum. And I think that Ted Nelson's quote, the father of hypertext, from one of the essays in the book says it pretty well. Our bodies are hardware and our behavior software. And that tended to be really true because Seek tended to kill the gerbils. A little bit of a hard-handed lesson there. I don't have time to go into detail about all of Architecture Machine Group's work. They were in operation from '67 to 1984 when they rolled into the MIT Media Lab and became 4 of the first 11 labs at the Media Lab when it first opened in the mid-'80s. But I just wanted to show you quickly other things that we see. Projects like Aspen Movie Map, where they strapped a movie camera to a Jeep, recorded images in Aspen, saved them to video disc, you know, those big round LP record-looking discs. And then they made kind of a proto-Google Street View. You could sit in this Eames lounge chair and drive using touchpads, so joysticks in the armchair, and zoom down the streets of Aspen while following yourself on a map on either side in this media environment called the media room. They also did a lot of work with digital mapping, and these were intended to be battlefield maps. The previous project, of course, is remote sensing and remote surveillance possibilities. And so this $1 million project that was recognized a decade later is, sure looks like an iPad. It's a Westinghouse window, and it's a set of digital layered maps with different kinds of haptic feedback. So I don't know if she's here, but I got this from Tian Yang, who is a PhD student in HCII here. So it's one of my favorite things. So how do we get beyond the cliches, and how do we get back to some of these bigger questions that we see in the basis of the work that architects and AI researchers were doing in the 60s, 70s, and 80s? I read this article a couple weeks ago in the New York Times. The writer said that AI is stuck and here's how to move it forward. And he was saying one problem is a lot of AI tends to be top-down. Well, I think designers are certainly good at understanding context and designing bottom-up. He also shortens things and kind of is fairly short-sighted in terms of how he thinks about funding. I think that this writer should be thinking about designers and architects. So it begs the question of what happens if AI and design combine forces. Again, there's that question of top-down and bottom-up. There's a question of what designers can teach about how to use constraints creatively. We use constraints to our benefit. Or how we might challenge the machine, or the user, or the programmer, or the designer. And these problems are really hard to solve, not least because most designers are not algorithmically inclined, and there aren't a lot of tools at hand for us to get our hands on directly today. I think in the next couple of days you'll see different approaches that people are taking, but it's still challenging. So I think we need to try different approaches. But I keep coming back to this question of the cliches. And I think that cliches only go so far. But AI needs designers, and for that matter, AI needs us. If you're interested in these ideas, my book comes out on November 11th, and there's a link here to it, and it's on my Twitter feed as well. I go into a lot more detail about this and other AI and design architecture connections. And I'll say thank you very much.
Thank you, Molly. I promise that no gerbils were hurt in the making of Span. But in all seriousness, Molly has an excerpt actually in our Span Reader, which will come in your swag bags tomorrow when you pick them up. It's excellent, and I'm sure the entire book will be excellent, but you can get a taste of it. We're going to take a short 15-minute break, but before we do, I just want to remind you again, the Span hashtag, Span17, if you want to follow along in the conversation or share any of your observations, we'd love to hear from you. And it's also a really great time to pick up your poster if you have number 1 through 68 on your badge. So go enjoy drinks. Welcome back. Welcome back to our live stream viewers. I hope you guys all enjoyed your break. And for people who are watching at home, I hope that you're paying attention to the slide behind me because it has a very special message for you related to winning things from us. So please pay attention to the slide behind me. Our next panelists will shed a unique light on what it means to run an independent design practice in Pittsburgh. Elana Schlenker is an independent graphic designer working with clients in the arts, publishing, and nonprofit sector, as well as self-initiated projects like Gratuitous Type, as she calls it, an occasional pamphlet for typographic smut. It's actually just a really cool magazine that she publishes and edits and designs on her own. Jakob Marsico is an interaction designer and creative technologist. He runs Ultra Low Res Studio, an arts engineering firm that designs and builds dynamic experiential installations integrated with the built environment. Lenka Clayton is a conceptual artist and educator whose interdisciplinary work considers, exaggerates, and alters the accepted rules of everyday life. She is the founder of an artist residency in motherhood, a self-directed open-source artist residency to empower and inspire artists who are also mothers. Yasko is an independent graphic designer who works with artists, curators, writers, and educators from a one-person studio. His clients include Carnegie Museum of Arts, Mass MoCA, Princeton Architectural Press, and many others. The panel will be moderated by Javier Lopez, a visual designer on the material design team based out of San Francisco. Welcome, Javier, and the panelists.
Thank you. Thanks. All right. So, hey, everybody. So is this working? Is everybody listening? Okay. Cool. How was the break? I'm hoping it was good. Well, nice, sweet. So my name is Javier Lopez. I'm a designer on the material design team here at Google. Material design is a user interface design system used by Google and external products. As a systems designer, I'm fascinated with the ways in which we, as designers, get to interact with and organize the world's information. Today's panelists are a very interesting bunch that are very deeply familiar with the ways in which we design for everyday life. Their practices both blend and define what does it mean to practice design in a contemporary studio. From installations to self-published magazines, to documentaries, to projects that extend the familiar into the poetic and the absurd. It is my very pleasure and honor to welcome Elana Schlenker, Jakob Marsico, Lenka Clayton, and Yasko. So, okay, so without much further ado, I'm just going to let you take it.
Okay. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm Elana Schlenker. I want to, before I jump into it, thank the Google design team for having me, especially for putting me on such an amazing panel of people I've admired for a long time. There's a delay. I run the studio. I have to see what it says to know what I do, I guess. I run Studio Elana Schlenker, which is a small, intentionally unspecialized practice based here in Pittsburgh, and also very, very part-time in Brooklyn, where I lived before I moved to Pittsburgh 3 years ago. Prior to going on my own full-time, which was about 4 years ago now, I worked at Condé Nast and Princeton Architectural Press, an independent publisher. Now I do a lot of print projects, mostly with other independent publishers, and I publish my own magazine. While the foundation of my practice is very much rooted in editorial design and print, I've always deliberately sought out a wider range of projects. So I'm engaged in a lot of branding. I do a lot of interactive work, mostly web design. And it's really important to me that I kind of maintain this unspecialized practice because working across these different mediums really helps me bring a fresh perspective to each one. And then in terms of the structure of my studio, because I think that's what we're sort of chatting about today, I maintain a very small operation. It's mostly me, and then occasionally a part-time person, a part-time studio manager. Sometimes I collaborate with my studio mate in Brooklyn, Mark Pernice, who came out. Hey, Mark. And I do this because it's really important to me to stay small so that I have the freedom to pursue my own personal projects and other opportunities to work outside of the studio. So my longest running personal project is Gratuitous Type, which is a magazine I've been publishing since 2011. It features projects and interviews from creatives all over the world, mostly graphic designers and type designers. But Gratuitous Type was sort of born out of my malaise working at Condé Nast, where I did branding and some collateral, but I mostly did advertorial design, which was fairly soul-sucking and involved kind of finding elaborate ways to make like bottles of shampoo look kind of interesting. And so just feeling very creatively frustrated and having loved magazines for a very long time, I started thinking about channeling some of that unused creative energy into a magazine project. At the same time, I sort of had this observation where there's this phenomena of just throwing a big letter on a page, and every designer who sees it is like, oh, that's beautiful. and there's nothing wrong with it. I do it. I'll do it tomorrow, probably. But, I just started to think about the idea of a letter being so titillating that it needed to be censored. And that's kind of how I found my way to this first cover of Gratuitous Type, and also like sort of a more overarching concept for the magazine. But so this first issue has this paper wrap that obscures the letter underneath, as if it were hiding something really scandalous, but of course it's just like this totally innocuous letter A. And I liked this approach in part because it kind of made it clear that this magazine didn't take itself too seriously, which I think is also a broader theme in my practice, just having a sense of humor about myself and my work. But also at the time I was really inexperienced, and also, of course there's already all of these amazing magazines out there. And so I had all of these fears about people questioning, and I kind of imagined all of these criticisms that they would have about the magazine. And so Gratuitous Type the name was a way of kind of acknowledging this criticism that didn't exist, but in kind of doing so, hopefully disarming it. So it's sort of like a joke and an apology. But beyond the name, contextualizing the magazine in the world of the pornographic lets me have a lot of fun with other conventions of the genre. So it gives me a language and a framework to kind of build the magazine around. And then it lets me do, is it gonna play? There we go. It lets me do super highbrow stuff like this. Tim Lahan is an artist who was featured in issue 4, and he made this for me as a loading graphic for the website. So I'm very mature. So now I've done 4.5 issues. Issue C up here was a themed issue. It was a color issue. This is issue 4, the last full issue that I've done. I don't have a ton of time to show you all the interiors, but something worth noting is that they're all, each issue I totally redesigned. So the size stays the same, but otherwise all of the production details, everything else is sort of up for grabs. And I will be honest and say that there's no bigger conceptual thought around that than it's just a lot more fun for me to change it every time. So this is now the most recent issue. It's issue 4.5. I also like to make it really confusing, I guess. But there's been so many interesting topics that come up along the way in doing this magazine that often kind of go beyond the world of graphic design. And I wanted to make this kind of supplement that used some of those topics as a jumping off point for new articles in this little miniature publication. So you can see it's much simpler. It's one color. In this, Amber mentioned that I do everything myself. For this supplement, I actually hired some writers, so that's like sort of a fun change for me too. But yeah, that's Gratuitous Type. And then moving on to a project that's kind of also jumping out of the world of beyond the world of graphic design is Less Than 100, which is the traveling pop-up shop I created to promote gender wage parity. The first shop was in Pittsburgh, the second was in New Orleans, and everything sold in the shop is designed by women. In Pittsburgh, that included Lenka, the amazing Lenka. And the idea is that the shop's pricing helps to make the wage gap more tangible. So there were 2 prices on every item, one for men and one for anyone identifying as a woman or non-binary individual. The second price reflects the wage gap in that location. So in Pennsylvania, where women earn 76% of what men make, they paid 76% of the price of any item in the shop. And in Louisiana, they paid 66%, which is like pretty fucking crazy. Okay, I don't know if you can do that. It's not the radio, I don't know. Anyway, you can send the FCC bill to me. No. Anyway, in addition to having items for sale, there was a free newspaper that elaborated on the issue. We had events like a negotiation workshop, artist visits and talks. We even did things like having an on-site manicurist in the New Orleans shop, which was really fun. And then finally, wrapping up, because I'm probably going long, most recently, if it will advance. The most recent project I've undertaken outside of the studio, that's a little bit of a different thing, is working for 3 months last fall as a designer in residence at the Facebook Analog Research Lab in Menlo Park, California. And while I was there, I sort of pursued my own work and then also created zines and posters and installations for the campus in response to specific briefs from the Analog Lab. So these posters are just a few of many things that I made. I haven't had an opportunity to really document anything yet, but it was a really amazing and informative experience, and being able to close up shop now and then to pursue these different interests and opportunities for me is as essential as the work that I do for clients. So that's kind of the overview of what I do, and I'm excited to talk more about it.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Jake Marsico, and there we go. So actually, I want to pull out my notes. I'm sorry. You prepared your notes. I didn't in advance. So this is loud. I am the principal at Ultra Low Res Studio, which is a design build firm, kind of arts engineering consulting. And when I say we, I use we a lot, but it's really just me. Although I do bring in people quite often kind of to collaborate and then to kind of help build out things. I'm also an adjunct at CMU where I teach media architecture, and I co-run a new art space in Polish Hill called 3577 Studios along with Steve Gurish and Alina Malkin. And that studio is kind of focused on new media work. Let's see here. So I'm going to talk about a couple of the projects that I've worked on over the past few years as Ultra Low Res Studio to kind of give you an idea of what we're up to. And the first is this series of scape projects. They have different names all involving scape, and they're all these interactive landscapes. And the first iteration of this was at Radcliffe Yard on Harvard's campus, and it's a collaboration with Show Architects. And what we kind of developed in this world was this kind of surreal landscape, which people kind of approached from afar. It looked really spooky at night. And as they walked through this kind of augmented environment, they started to figure out how they fit in with this world, kind of how these scapes were reacting to them. Then after that permanent installation or semi-permanent installation, we did kind of a traveling version of it, which went to DC and Cincinnati, kind of with the same intentions. The next project is a permanent installation, also a light installation at an architectural scale, but it's interactive, but in a bit of a different way. This is at the Knoxville branch of the Carnegie Library here in Pittsburgh, which is near Mount Oliver. It's essentially right down the street from Mount Oliver. This was a really cool project. This branch was being redesigned by GBBN Edge Architects here in Pittsburgh, and they did a really great job. If you're ever in the area, kind of pop your head in. It's a really funky building from the 60s, I think, that they've done a great job of reinterpreting. Julian Sandoval designed this really beautiful parametrically designed perforated screen that kind of goes over the front of the windows, of the facade. And they wanted to add some dynamic lighting, so they reached out to me, and through kind of a series of design meetings and exercises with Toby Greenwald from the Carnegie Library, who's the head of digital strategy there, and the architects, we figured out that we didn't really want this to be interactive in any sort of traditional sense, but we did want it to be future-proof. We didn't have the resources to do everything we wanted, but we knew that at some point we wanted to add to it. So this installation has, we developed kind of an API for it, and this allowed people to kind of build appendages to extend the functionality of the wall. And actually, some of the students, this student who made this project is sitting right here in the front. Some CMU students kind of, through projects, they built these physical interactions that then interacted with that wall. Along with these kind of light installations, I also like kind of doing more exploratory or what's the good word I had here? It might not be that good of a word. Design exercises. I like doing these other exercises where I kind of try to just learn more about how I can use this type of media that I'm interested in. And this is a piece that is at the Butler Institute of American Art in Youngstown. And the question that I'm kind of asking with this project is kind of how low can you go in terms of resolution when recreating video. So with this project there, in this stairwell, there's this big, beautiful windows that look out to this massive tree. And if you ever watch trees, big trees in the wind, it's this incredibly complex, highly detailed motion. And kind of the question was, could I translate that motion into 9 binary pixels? So we have smart glass that switches on or off. So there's like 0 color depth, and it's 9 of them. The answer is no, it doesn't translate at all. It's like totally illegible. But it's cool that we can do this, right? We can take these kind of complex inputs and trim them down and filter them down into something that's still beautiful. It might not be as evocative of the input as we had hoped, but we're still kind of doing this motion translation, and that's a big part of what I'm interested in. I didn't even play the video. I'm sorry. Yeah, so this smart glass is really cool material, and I can show you these things later, or you can check it out on the website. Okay, moving on. I also do stage art or event stuff. Events are a really big market, and I like doing things at scale, and I like working with, I guess you could say, the private sector. I think it's always interesting when commissions come through from non-institutional people. It's just kind of a different way of working, and it's a different back and forth, and it's a different payment structure, all this. So this is the Abstractions Conference that happened last year. This was commissioned by Justin Reese from Code and Supply, who's a great person to work with. And Justin wanted something that could act as kind of a slow-moving backdrop to these keynote speakers. This was a tech conference in Pittsburgh. But it could also be physically interactive that people could play with during during downtime, and was social media connected. So we kind of mashed all of these things. This project was fun. It's a big projection mapping project, 20 screens, 1 projector, a Connect, and Twitter. We kind of mashed all of this stuff into a piece of eye candy. And we got this. And then this, I'm going to quickly play this video. It's a really busy fall. I'm super excited about what's coming up. There's a light installation going into Wien Hall at Carnegie Mellon. There is a data visualization project going into a financial advisor's office in the South Hills suburbs of Pittsburgh, which I'm super excited about, mainly because it's a small office, and it's amazing that an office of that size in the suburbs of Pittsburgh is interested in commissioning this type of work. And then there's a big, well, I shouldn't say big. I'm collaborating with Chris Carlson in a performance, an audiovisual performance in November for the What's On Festival. So that's it. Thanks.
Hello. I'm Lenka Clayton. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I moved to Pittsburgh from London on the 9th of the 9th, 2009. So I just celebrated my 8th anniversary in Pittsburgh. I think that you just met John Rubin in the last panel. So he's a collaborator of mine. I have an individual studio practice, and I also work with different people, and John's one of those people. So we just finished up a 6-month project for the Guggenheim, but I'm based here, and then I kind of work all over the place. I'm just going to share 3 recent projects with you. This is really cool. When we press this button, it lights up something in the back and someone moves the slide forward, so it's not actually... okay, so...
You weren't supposed to say
so I'm giving away all the secrets. So this is from a series called Typewriter Drawings. For the last 5 years, I've made drawings just using a portable typewriter. Every single mark in the drawing comes from the regular keys, like the punctuation and the letters. I have to fold the paper and put it through the machine hundreds of times in order to get the marks that I'm looking for. This one's called My Son's Eyelashes. It's made with the parentheses. This is Drinking Straw in Water. This is Picasso's signature. That's made with the period. It's fake. It's totally fake. So the typewriter is an incredible tool at what it does, but it's really, really shit at drawing. It's really hard to draw with. And in that sort of creative battle, I find this amazing space to explore. This one's called Big Flowery Pot. And it's made with every single key on the typewriter. I don't know if you have the span reader, but there's a few more in there if you want to see them. And I've made 300 drawings, so there's a lot on my website. So limitation is also a major subject of this project, which is called An Artist Residency in Motherhood. Which is, so 6 years ago, I had my first child. I have 2 kids. And I would look, at that period when I was about to have kids, I was looking for I was typing in artist, parents, looking for role models. How the hell do you do those 2 things at the same time? And I didn't find anything, or hardly anything. There was one project from the 70s that people kept referencing to me. And I was like, that's older than me. Where are all the other artist parents? And so when I had kids, I realized that a lot of the professional things that I'd kind of lent on, like residencies, were suddenly closed off. People didn't want artists to come and bring their families with them to residencies. So my response was to create my own residency, which happened instead of here, where a normal residency might be. This is rural Switzerland, where you'd go and live in a cabin and have this beautiful creative time. My residency happens here. This is my son, Otto. It happens in my life and home as a parent. So I stay where I am, and I reframe my experience as a parent as material to make work out of, rather than something to stop me working. So I wrote a manifesto, and I got funding, and I made business cards, because that's how you start everything. These are the one on the left's mine, and these are my kids, so I have 2 kids, kids' business cards. And I made 32 projects. So over 2 years, I was an artist in residence in motherhood, and I made 32 projects. So this is an example of one of them. It's a sculpture called 63 Objects Taken from My Son's Mouth. I don't just say anything else about. So then 2 years ago, on Mother's Day, 2016, I opened the residency up to anybody who wanted to take part. So it's a website and a framework that you can run through and adapt for yourself. And there are currently 400 artists in residence in motherhood, which is like my proudest thing, in 34 countries all over the world. So if you're interested, artistresidencyinmotherhood.com. And you can look on each one of these red markers is somebody who's doing the residency. And if you click on it, they have the dates they're doing the residency in their website. So it's this sort of big networking tool, and also a tool to give visibility, because what I found, like when I was pregnant, is it's invisible. You know, artists who have kids, especially women, is an invisible situation. So the last thing I want to show you is 2 new pieces that I made this year in collaboration with the Fabric Workshop and Museum, which is this incredible institution in Philadelphia. I was an artist in residence there, and both pieces relate to this sculpture, which is not mine, unfortunately. This is by Konstantin Brancusi, and it's a piece called The Sculpture for the Blind. And this was a starting point for me. I was really drawn to it, in particular because of its title. So I went to see it at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. Here it is. And I found this wonderful situation where the sculpture for the blind is shown inside a glass box. So it's only available to the sighted. So all of my work starts with an existing situation in the real world that I then respond to. So that was my starting point. And I decided that I was going to misinterpret Brancusi's title as an instruction. So how was I going to get this sculpture into the hands of the blind? We exhausted every avenue you can think of, like borrowing the sculpture, copying the sculpture, having limited access. It was all like not possible. So I used the tools that I had as a sighted person, and I went to see the sculpture, and I wrote a really detailed description of it. And then I invited 17 people from Philadelphia who identify as blind to listen to my description, and then to carve what they heard or understood from my words out of plaster blocks. So this is one of the artists, and he was using, as you can see, like traditional sculpting tools. This woman told me that no one had ever described anything to her in as much detail before. So each person made their own, the object that they understood from my description. And then they were shown on smaller versions of the original pedestal that the original is shown on, but without the glass top, so that the artists and visitors could experience the project both, with their eyes, but also by touch. The last piece I'm going to show is a piece called Unanswered Letter. So while I was researching for the piece that I just showed you, I found this incredible letter in the archives of the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It was written in 1974, and it was sent to the curator at the time. And essentially, I'll just paraphrase it quickly, a member of the public called Brian Morgan tells this beautiful story about his Romanian great-grandfather, who happened to come from a village very close to where Brancusi came from, and he also made a white marble egg several years before Brancusi. And he was sort of wondering, what his question was, what is it about Brancusi that puts his sculpture in this museum, and it's seen by 2,000 people a day, and my great-grandfather's identical sculpture is on my desk, and no one cares about it at all. What's the difference? Who creates that value system? And it was such a beautiful letter. We actually found him. He's still alive, and I spoke to him on the telephone and found out that his letter was never answered. So he sent it off, and no one ever wrote back. So I copied the letter 1,000 times and sent it to museum directors and curators all around the world. And I invited them to reply 40 years late to Brian Morgan and to share their own particular perspective and point of view. 179 people replied. We don't have time to read them all. It's going to be a book coming out in a few months, but I actually copied the original letter and a whole bunch of the replies, and some of you have got them under your seats to read later. So, thank you very much.
I apologize in advance for any delays in this. I did this wrong. I have like 1,000 images and very little words, and then I found out that there's this lag, so bear with me. All right, we good? So I've got to be one of the luckiest guys in the world. I get to work with artists, curators, writers, photographers, each and every day. I get to design books like this one, a bunch of artists and writers centered around the theme of wonder. I get to do a book like this for the artist Agnes Bolt. She set up this gift exchange between Braddock, North Dakota, and Braddock, Pennsylvania, where these people were exchanging these gifts back and forth. I get to do exhibitions, design exhibitions. This one celebrated the photo book, so it was part reading room, bookshop, library, all in the former coat check room of the Carnegie Museum. This exhibition was for the prolific Charles Teeny Harris, photographed African-American life from the 1930s to the 1970s. A brilliant photographer, but he didn't document his work at all. He didn't record the names of the people that were in his photographs. So we designed this exhibition so that people could come in and try to identify the people that were in the photographs, over 1,000 photographs. So people found themselves, they found their grandparents, their uncles, aunts, and it really helped the museum out. And then I get to do crazy things like this. This is a restaurant that only serves food for the countries that the United States is in conflict with. John showed this earlier. Conflict kitchen, different countries that had to change them out every few months. But I'm also really interested in self-initiating work. So this is giving myself a project. It could be anything. It could be telling a story, or giving someone an experience, or lost my train of thought. But the idea is that I still use the tools of graphic design to do this stuff, but there's no client. And if there is a client, I guess the client would be me. So some examples of this through the years: I built this giant wall like Donald Trump, and I covered it with over 7,000 unique New Year's resolutions. This was set up on New Year's Eve. So we had all these different resolutions. Each one was different, and people could scan the wall, find a resolution that resonated with them personally, and then rip it off the wall, put it in their pocket, and keep it throughout the year, and then look back and see if they actually kept it. All right. I did this book of shivs that are prisoner-made weapons. I got this collection of shivs from a friend who I don't think came about it quite legally. But we did this book and put them down on a flatbed scanner and scanned them at 100% real size, so you could just have this idea of reaching out and putting your hand around each one. I love this one on the left. It's a glove inside another glove, and there are these upholstery tacks on the knuckle, so a guy could make a fist scrape down through somebody's face and then straighten his hand back out, and there's no evidence of what just did the damage. This one on the right's for Lenka. It's a carriage ripped out of a typewriter and sharpened, very sharp.
That's really nice.
Market Square is this place in downtown Pittsburgh that some people spend a great deal of their time down there, days and nights, and the city had this idea to sort of clean it up, to make it family friendly. So I went down there and I spent about a week and a half with these people, and I talked to them, and a lot of them were really upset about these plans and how it might affect their lives because they spent so much time down there. And so over the course of 2 weeks, with these lettered tiles, I spelled out excerpts of the conversations that we had that talked about how they felt about this place. And I sort of Christopher Wooled it so that it wasn't so easy to read. You sort of had to spend time with it to read it. And over 2 weeks, put each of these excerpts in different corners of the square for hopefully other people to read. It didn't work. They came in and bulldozed the place. And there's no place to sit now. I made this book for Billy Nardozzi. He's Pittsburgh's poet. Each Monday he goes down and plunks $100 down to have his poetry published in the celebration section of the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. He also includes a photo of himself and a phone number to call. This is in the book. It's hard to see, but this part here is where I clip him out every Monday. I clip his poem out and I put a gold star where his photo should be in the thing. And I honestly I loved him, but I didn't realize what a cult following he had until I set up a series of poetry readings for him. And so many people showed up to hear him read and to get their book signed and to just to meet him. They also brought him presents, like this wristband. What would Billy Nardozzi do, a wristband? And then finally, an experiment I did where I invited 252 Pittsburgh artists to each create a portrait of one person, my friend John Reigert. John is an artist himself, but he's bipolar, and this really disconnected him from a community of artists that he really was a big part of back in the day. Some of the artists worked off of this photo that I sent them, but a lot of artists just wanted to meet him in person. So we set up a bunch of group sittings where John would come for the day and he'd be accommodating to anything that was asked of him. He was great. We also, a couple more of these. The artist also wanted to meet him. Oh, this is one of my favorite people right there. Do you recognize her? There was also people that wanted to meet him at his house. So we brought the artists out to his house. And first in Millvale, where he lived with his girlfriend, and then halfway through the project, they broke up. Oh, there's my friend Lenka, too. They broke up, and he moved to an apartment in Lawrenceville, so we continued the artist visits there in Lawrenceville. This next one, this guy set up a green screen in his kitchen. But we also went to the artist house and studios. They invited us into their homes and studios. And we just had so many really amazing interactions with all these completely talented and generous people that did this thing for us. Oh yeah, this could go on for about an hour on that story. Made a bunch of new friends and also saw some old friends. Couple more, sorry. And one more. And we met in coffee shops. We met in parks. We met in botanical gardens. We met in cemeteries. We met on riverbanks. We met in hospitals. So many things happened in the year and a half of this project, but two that I'll share with you. We happened on this live drawing class, and John decided right then and there that he wanted to be the model. And so for 4 exhausting hours, exhausting for me, not for him, he sat on this live drawing session. He also was asked to give a workshop on self-portraiture, to a bunch of kids. So this is him showing Vincent van Gogh's self-portrait to this little boy on an iPad. And then, of course, he had to ask all the kids to draw his portrait. The portraits just started coming in. I wish I could show you all of them. There were 200 and some, but we didn't just have drawings and paintings and photographs. We had interactive pieces, we had sculptures, we had sound pieces, we had films and movies. Just some really, really amazing stuff. And then we had an exhibition. So this is John going into the opening of the exhibition. So many of his friends were there, people that he hadn't seen in years were there. His parents came down from Cincinnati to be there. And then throughout the run of the exhibition ran for about 2 months. John was there every day. He came down on the bus and opened up the place and was the docent. So you can imagine somebody coming in, seeing all these portraits of one person, and then turning around and there's John himself in the flesh. And it blew people's minds, some people's minds. But he was there, and he answered questions, and he told stories of the project and of his life. And we also produced a monster 700-page book that documented the entire process. Eric Leege, who's in this photo and in a bunch of photos that you probably saw that I showed, he followed the entire thing and wrote this massive, massive essay that we combined with the photos that I took and also photos of each portrait. Thanks.
Great. So I figured, we have a little bit of time, so I'm going to just sneak in one question. But I'm going to start by expressing my condolences for little Violet, for Elana. I don't know if you guys know about this, but Elana has a pet squirrel. And I'll let you take it from there.
Do you want me to talk about the squirrel?
Sure. Why not?
First I would say, I think I almost cried like 3 times. There's like such beautiful projects. And then I had a squirrel we found in our yard. Something I love about Pittsburgh is it's a really wild city. And so, I had a squirrel, but she passed away. But we had some really nice times, so.
We'll
so now that you're all brought down.
Yeah. Bringing down the house, so now I can bring it up again. The other thing that I really wanted to cover with you guys is, we are in Pittsburgh. I know, Lenka, you decided one day to move from the UK to the US.
Mm-hmm.
And not often do we hear somebody moving from London to Pittsburgh. Would you mind talking about it? Be
surprised. So I came to Pittsburgh. Basically, I had a vision. So I was living in London at the time. And I was on the phone to my partner. He lives from the States. We were having that conversation, where should we live? What should we do? That kind of conversation. And while we were having that conversation, I saw the word Pittsburgh written in my mind's eye. So it was really in 3-dimensional letters. I don't know if you know Kennywood, but it looked like a Kennywood carpenter had built them. And I was like, let's move to Pittsburgh. And he was like, okay. And so we it took me 9 months to get a visa to move here, and then we basically turned up with 2 suitcases from the airport, and now it's 8 years later. So if you don't live here, you should. It's really cool.
Brett, I know that you're pretty much an institution here in Pittsburgh, whether you want to admit it or not.
Belonging institution.
But I would love to hear about the advantages and the challenges of designing in Pittsburgh.
Advantages and challenges of living in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, living and designing in Pittsburgh.
Well, I'm sure it's the same in any city, but I'll focus on the advantages.
Sure.
Not the disadvantages. I'll tell this story. This story answers your question. Do you guys know about making websites responsive? Is this a thing? Is this a new thing? I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Why not?
So I was making my 12-year-old website responsive, and so I had to look at this body of work, 15 years of work, and I say this completely at the risk of sounding corny, but I looked at all the work that I'd done, and I immediately saw the relationships. I didn't see the work. I just saw the people that were part of those projects. And that really struck me. And I don't know if that's a Pittsburgh thing. I mean, there might be designers in other cities that can say the same thing. There might be Pittsburgh designers here that are saying this guy is insane. But I don't lose fact. I just don't lose. I'm just so appreciative that I get to work with people that I respect and admire and learn from, but also enjoy keeping company with. And I don't know if that, like I said, I don't know if that speaks to Pittsburgh or not, but it's it's good for me.
It must. It must. I think there's a big sense of community in all the work that you guys have shown. That is definitely appealing and jumps out straight up. With the last 2 minutes that I have for a question, I really wanted to touch on the idea of, like, you guys have a lot of self-started projects. And you're blurring the line of what is it that a designer does for a client versus what is it that a designer does for himself or herself. Why be a designer, an author, entrepreneur at this moment in time, and why in Pittsburgh?
Mm-hmm. Should I start?
Sure.
Well, I think the profession of design attracts people who are interested in putting their hands into all kinds of different things. And being a designer, I get to kind of jump in and learn about whatever it is that sort of comes along to me that, in whatever industry it happens to be in. And I think being interested in authorship and entrepreneurship and doing these self-initiated projects is just an extension of that. So it's less that I'm trying to be an entrepreneur and make money, and it's more that just so many things are interesting to me, and I have this drive to make things that doing it myself is just a way to accomplish that. So it's really that simple. And in terms of why Pittsburgh, I mean, it's really easy to do things here, and there's a lot of resources, and it also feels like it matters if you do it here, whereas, coming from New York, I would have never done less than 100 in New York to start, because there's just the barriers of affordable space, and there's so many other things going on and what have you. But in Pittsburgh, it was like I found space, but I was meeting with people to try to get just connected to other people, and one of those organizations, the Women and Girls Foundation, was like, do you want some money for this? And so it was just like, yes. And so that's like the kind of stuff that I feel like is unique to Pittsburgh that makes it like really great to pursue these sorts of projects.
Exciting. Jake, I know that you're running your own studio, and you're kind of living every young designer's dream by going on your own.
Yeah, I mean, as far as entrepreneurship, I don't like working for people. In general, which was probably true for most people, but I kind of made that decision before I went to grad school. And then, the type of work that I do, I think works really well in Pittsburgh. In general, 10 years ago, this type of kind of big tech, architectural scale tech type stuff probably was not affordable for second-tier size cities like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Cleveland. And I think two things have happened since then. Is like the cost of doing that work has come down quite a bit, and the awareness of kind of the existence of that type of work has risen in places like Pittsburgh. So it's not just like the creative director of Google or people with that mindset are aware of this type of work. I think the owner of a 30-person financial advisory in the South Hills is aware of it. So for me, Pittsburgh and this region is it seems like a fairly fresh market. And also, I'm from here, and my family's here, and it's nice to, be here. I have some nostalgia for the city.
I'm gonna close one more question. We live in a world that is increasingly politicized and hyper-politicized. Do you guys find yourself, and this is something that I would like to hear from all of you guys, do you find yourself self-censoring or changing your opinions before you put out any work in public? Do you wanna
I don't, but I've thought about this. I had an experience in Pittsburgh with a printer who all of a sudden said, I can't work with you anymore because you support Bernie Sanders, and like, it was really weird. But it's a much less liberal place than New York, and so you do have to, when you talk about Donald Trump, it's like, Donald Trump, because you don't know who's around, So there's that, but I don't personally censor myself, and I guess I embrace that on social media. My presence is me as much as it is my studio, and I'm fine with that line blurring, so I don't. Maybe, and that's maybe why I should, because there's a lot of pictures of squirrels up there right now, and everyone's like, I thought you were into graphic design, and so maybe I should censor myself more. I don't know.
Lenka.
I don't censor myself. I had a sort of funny experience with that, though. The sculpture that I showed you, the 63 objects taken from my son's mouth, that had a sort of weird life. So I kind of created the title and the collection of things, and then it sort of, which is the point I really love in being an artist, you kind of let go of it and it goes off on some weird travel. So it ended up being like acquired by a museum, which was funny. So I have to go to a museum to see this like weird collection. And then it ended up in different newspapers around the world, and one of them was the Daily Mail. Don't know if you're familiar. And it was in the Daily Mail, basically about like an example of bad parenting. And it was crazy. I shouldn't have done this, but I read the comments under the article, and it was just like, I mean, British people, their favorite, the national sport is like criticizing other people's parenting, and this was just like an absolute field day. So that was a moment where I was like, shit, why did I do that? But otherwise, no.
When I did my pop-up shop, I read the comments and like was really upset about it for a while. So I made the same mistake.
We're not going to do that again.
I wonder where the comments after this panel are going.
Yeah.
It's going to be
terrible
fun.
parenting.
I don't know if you have anything to add, but
No, but an interesting story that I think of when I hear that. I've never censored myself, but maybe I should. But an interesting story is Conflict Kitchen. When they did Palestine, when John and Don decided to do Palestine, they had these death threats. Like they literally had to shut it down because they were getting these letters that were going to blow up the restaurant. And so I was immediately frightened for them. But then I thought, you know what? My name's on that. My name's on those wrappers. Like in 4-point type, Brett Yasko. So I was afraid for about a day. But just seeing how John and Don handled that was just so amazing to me. And I don't know if anybody followed it or Facebooks it or whatever you call it, but there was just like this, they shut the restaurant down, but there was this outpouring of people coming down to the restaurant and pinning up notes of support and rallying around, even though they weren't selling food, rallying around it. And it just made you feel really good about the city, this country, and where we are for a minute at least.
The work that I do isn't really, censorable. It's like lights moving, right? It's not politically, motivated. But I will say that working in Pittsburgh is interesting because, you work with. I work with a lot of kind of craftspeople or, machine shops or, I think the company's like Richard Rolls, a steel rolling company, and you go into a lot of these shops and I don't know if this is a Pittsburgh thing, but you go into a lot of these shops and there's like clear decor that is very different, that kind of shows their different political beliefs. So I don't know if this is particularly a Pittsburgh thing, but it's sometimes you have to work with people that have very different belief systems as you, and I think it's actually I think it's important sometimes to do that, because we're in this position now where we are so polarized that at least in my work, that's one of my favorite parts of my job is like meeting people who are not at Google span, right, and people who have very different political beliefs, and it kind of forces me into these positions. So yeah, that's I guess my kind of political take on this.
If I can just add to that.
Please, yeah.
Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Yeah, that's something I really like about Pittsburgh. In Brooklyn, you're like, go to a party and it's like, oh, what do you do? I'm a graphic designer. Oh, yeah, me too. And, oh, yeah, you too? And here it's like, what do you do? Like, my neighbors are physical therapists and like they do other things, and I feel like I'm in a real world. Not that like New York is not a real place, it's like an amazing place, but I like the grounding of being somewhere where people don't give a shit about what I do. I really like that, so.
I feel like that's a really good way to close this. I really want to thank you. I want to thank you guys for today, and
you.
this has been awesome.
Thanks.
And thank you very much.
All right.
Thank you. Yeah, sure. Thank you, guys. Thank you. I'm really sad to say that Billy Nardozzi and Mr. John are not speaking, but I'm really excited. I want to move to Pittsburgh now. So, yeah, I live in Brooklyn. Okay, so thank you to our panelists. It says my name, but I'm talking about other people. Thank you to our panelists. I just wanted to talk about what's happening tomorrow a little bit before we break. Tomorrow will open at 9 a.m., and there will be a light breakfast of pastries and coffee. For those of you who signed up for workshops, you should have received an email confirming that you got into a workshop or not. And for those of you not attending a workshop, do not fear. We have lots of programming available for you to enjoy, including incredible demos from Disney Research and Ali Momeni, as well as material design reviews and code labs. So if you would like to sign up for those, we do have a sign up at the registration desk that's going to open up about half of the slots, so you can do that now. We'll also have slots available tomorrow, so don't worry. And these reviews and code labs happen in 15-minute durations. And if none of that interests you, you can just work from Span. We will have internet, desk space, coffee. I mean, you really don't actually need anything else to work. So seriously, come enjoy the space. You can totally hang out. And of course, I mean, you know, I'd like to talk about the swag bag, but we do have the swag tomorrow. It will have the Span reader in it. A number of the panelists in the last panel have work in there, and others that you'll be meeting tomorrow. Again, you can always check the schedule at g.co/span17. So enjoy the food and drinks, and we'll see you tomorrow.